there's a couple of things there's one word we haven't used so far, or at least I don't think I've heard us mention it, which is very important. It was alluded to in the talk that I gave in the beginning, and that sense of obligation.
Yeah.
That we are obliged to do something. And within that concept of obligation, I think it's almost the flip side, that in being able to answer the question, for whom are we doing this? And I'm thinking about all kinds of situations throughout my entire life where I say, well, okay, so I'm going to do this. And I never took the time to actually ask the question to myself, so who am I doing this for? Am I doing this for myself? Am I doing this for somebody else? And then it comes to the question, and this is something that you alluded to, Zsofia, in this, do they even care? And I'm going to give you an example of a time that I was much younger, and in fact, I was still living in the States, and I had a job, and I would get really frustrated because I cared more than anybody else. You know the situation. I think a number of the people listening will know this one as well. And so it was right before I moved back here to Europe. And so going away party and all that. And I had to go back into the office where I decided to go back in to talk to some people. My seat was taken. It was like I was never there. I had certain people, it didn't even bother to say hello to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I would only been gone for a couple of days, and that was truly a wake-up call for me, to understand not only are we all dispensable, which is true, we are all dispensable, but don't live under the illusion that anybody's going to be grateful for these things that you do. So taking all that into consideration, if you cannot answer the question for whom you're doing it for, and understanding that intrinsic value that you should be deriving out of all this, then that's a choice too, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think you nailed it, Mike. I mean, I was blabbering about the whole, process for a longer period of time, but you really nailed it. If we cannot pinpoint down the value that goes bidirectionally or multidirectionally in the process, and then we cannot define what it really, who am I doing this for, then it becomes a burden. It becomes something that we shouldn't be doing. That's not going to be authentic, as we usually say.
Well, we're living our lives for somebody else, but not for ourselves. That's for sure. There was something else that I didn't think of before. Well, actually, I did think of it before. Perhaps if I first start in describing the thought process that I went through before coming up with this narrative that I read in beginning the show. First, I wanted to create that character as a woman, because it's so easy to point out the injustice. But then I thought that, no, I'm going to put this person as a male because the scenarios are different. But all these processes we've been talking about apply to both sexes.
True. Yeah.
But there was something that came out in our conversation that really got me thinking. And going back to this idea that whether you toss in the towel, I bet you, and again, I'm going to be really keen on your response here. I bet you, as a woman, they're always going to say, you're not tenacious enough.
100%. 100%.
I knew it. I knew it.
It's like you cannot even avoid, this kind of label, and like a stamp. It's like it's there. It's hanging there, and people judge you, and people will judge you who have no idea about your life. They never walked a mile in your shoes. And you know what? That's the other thing I think that many women need to learn as well. It's like, yes, we have obligations, and you know what? I bet nobody ever asks how many times women prioritize everybody else's interests above their own by design. And then at the same time, they're labeling a few women who got to the end of their ropes. But also, I mean, sorry, also guys, sometimes it's also guys, right? I mean, when the people really toss in the towel and then they get this labeling, and I'm like, you know what? Compassion and actually thinking through what the other person went through. Maybe that's another story that we need to talk about at another time, but that's something that I think is really missing. It's like, don't judge before you walk the same mile in the other person's shoes. It's like, excuse me, how dare you? How dare people? I mean, we got to a point in our societies where we are ready to judge everybody else, but we are not ready to listen, truly listen, not listen to answer, but listen to understand. And I'm like, what? And that also comes back to the multitude of our problems, mental problems as societies. It's like, we don't want to respect the other people enough to care. And I need to use your words, Mike, because I think that's where it comes down to care. Do I care? And if I care, I'm going to be sometimes a pain in the ass because I care. At the moment I don't care, that's going to be the problem, right? And yeah, so back to your question. Yeah, of course, women get that a lot. And I think it's just also one of those things where parents need to take a different look at how they bring up their children, give that power to their little girls as well, to say, hey, you know what, actually you have a choice. And if it really takes more out of you and it takes the life out of you, then you have the freedom to walk out and do something else.
Yeah, and if I can add something to that, of course, I'm full agreement. And I think that the difference of this concept of liberation of whether you are male or female does take on different dimensions, and we shouldn't forget that. But there's a universal component here that is all related to this question of care. And if you don't care about yourself, how are you going to care about anybody else?
Oh, you're so right. You're so right. And yeah, I think both men and women, we tend to equally undermine our own self. And yeah, I know it's a classic and almost overused, analogy of put your own oxygen mask on first and then help others, right? But it's true. If you don't have anything to give from, then what do? That's the end of the Sackgasse, as we say, or the
it's the cul-de-sac.
cul-de-sac.
Yes,
Exactly.
yeah, it's an emotional cul-de-sac. That's what it is. And the problem is that we think, oh, we can't go any further, and we think that progress is always going forward. But then we're making the assumption that we were on the right path and that we have to. Sometimes, I'm just staying with your analogy. I never thought of it before. So thanks again for this metaphor. But that means that sometimes we have to go back to find out what is the right path. And again, staying with the subject of liberation and understanding the sense of choice that we have, if we are performing certain duties where we might feel that either doesn't have to just be emotional, it could be financial, it could be for self-enriching, whatever it may be. But if we find ourselves to be in that cul-de-sac, we have the choice to put the car into reverse and get out of the cul-de-sac and go in different routes and not feel that we're a failure.
100%.
Which I think is another part of this equation, isn't it?
100%. And look, that's an important aspect that you just mentioned. Why do we feel like being a failure if we went down the path or one path that we thought that would be the right one? Because I truly believe that everybody goes down a path not thinking that it will fail, but thinking it will succeed. That's the right one. But when we see that it's not the right one, actually, we are not a failure. We are winning, because that's the point where we can make corrections, right? As you said. So going further down that path, it's called the suck, as you mentioned, that's the failure. Putting the car in reverse or putting ourselves in reverse and finding a new path, that's the success, actually, or that's the That's the truth, right?
Right. And the liberation is relishing, this might sound funny, but relishing the fact that you were able to make that choice to put the car into reverse and choose something else, and understanding all the repercussions that are tied to it. Because what my experience has been is that these repercussions really aren't that big.
No.
It's more ego. It's more of an
Yeah.
ego thing, so we do not want to we don't want to look like a failure. So that means we're not interested in this internal satisfaction, but these are all these external things. And if you're able to free yourself of this particular conundrum that we have in our head, and I think there's another word that we haven't mentioned so far that really comes into play, and that's this word of acceptance.
Yeah.
And when I refer to acceptance, it takes on different permutations. It's accepting your situation. That okay, so it's crappy.
Yeah.
So that means I need to do something about it and not lament and not play victim. I'm into eliminating victimhood in our lifetime, because I think it's just a method by which we manipulate ourselves and manipulate others.
Oh yes.
But also accepting ourselves, and I think this is another part of this liberation component. And then I realize I am looking at the clock here. That we have to be able to forgive ourselves. But I don't even like this word forgiveness. Why? Because we expect something from ourselves that we can never be. We are not a machine. We are human beings. And that means that we are inconsistent. And in fact, that's the beauty of human beings, that we are inconsistent. And part of that acceptance is to say that we are as we are.
Yeah.
And that's liberation too, isn't it?
100%. And that's why you're so right that forgiveness is not the right word. Really, acceptance is the right word, because forgiveness implies that we did something wrong while we didn't. It's just the path of living our lives. What is wrong? Honestly, what is wrong, right? I mean, of course, if I kill someone, that's downright wrong, right? But these are kind of the things. Other than committing a crime really against someone, whatever I do in my life, who can tell me what is right or wrong? I believe if we live a life where we are honoring our needs and other people's needs around us, and we balance these, then we cannot do something wrong. We can take steps that turn out not to be the right ones, but it's not wrong. So I give it to you 100%. Acceptance, self-acceptance, and acceptance towards others is really the key as well here.
Yeah, we keep thinking in this life that everything is so clearly defined, right? This is right and this is wrong, and we don't understand that too much of something that's right could be wrong.
Exactly.
We're talking about sustainability in a steady state.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so we need to think about that, right?
Yeah, and really change is the only thing that's constant, right? So if we think about that as well a little bit, then trying to keep up a certain status quo is also something that will never be authentic, right? So
I think I smell it coming on, that we're getting to the closing statements. Is there anything? I'm afraid I didn't leave you with too much time, Zsofia. Apologies for that.
No problem.
But anything else that you'd like to include that you thought that we should have and we just couldn't shoehorn it into this conversation?
I think we discussed so many things, but probably the only thing that I would add is, even if you have fear of doing something, you need to just do it and see that skewed odds of or perception of failure versus success will just disappear and you will see that the repercussions, as you mentioned, Mike, are so few or much lower than what we think. And then at the same time, the rewards are much higher. So our, probability perception is really skewed. So just do it, and 99% of the time, it won't be as bad as you thought it would be.
And so I'm going to pose a question that I didn't pose. After talking about all of this, what's your impression?
I mean, look, the thing is that people think, that doing what they are doing right now, just getting, your example, that's easier than what I do. And that's true. And that's one of those things that we rarely talk about. And I didn't know if the audience is strong enough to bring that aspect into the discussion right now. But choosing the right path will always be a little bit harder than going down a chosen one for us, right? That's going to be harder because it requires working on ourselves every day and asking questions every day. But it's much more worth it. So I'm happy with the discussion. I think we also touched on those aspects which others, maybe those are the things, you think that the discussion started slower, but then I tried to think about it, and I'm like, maybe those are the aspects that can make others think about the deeper aspects, just a bit of segue for them to warm up to the subject a little bit.
I wouldn't say it started slower. But I noticed that it's almost like you're playing a piece of music in these types of conversations, especially when they're dealing with pretty hardcore subjects like this one was. That it's like we're in a symphony and we're playing our instruments and we keep leading towards this crescendo, and really I have that feeling. So I wouldn't necessarily it was slower, and I don't mean to diminish anything was talked about. Quite the opposite. But I noticed this trend in these conversations because we're just so into it. We're so into what we're talking about that we really, I can only speak for myself, I forget everything else. I just totally forget it.
True.
And that is when we stay with the subject of liberation, I truly believe that this is liberation, isn't it?
100%. And that's why I also wanted to say a huge thank you, because these are the things, I do, and I would never, ever, think about any transactional aspect here, because these are the discussions that give me also a sense of life, a sense of accomplishment and purpose, just to use some of the keywords. But really, these are the things where you can speak freely about what matters.
Yeah, and that's really important. I have another question for you, because I'd be really keen on your opinion. Because I know how you are, and I know that you do not hold back. But we still need to make some sort of judgment in some fashion, or I think we do. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And how far we actually push it to others. So we talk about a subject which is very important to both of us, and we suspect that that's equally important to a number of other people. We're making that assumption. And you're probably going to have two more categories of people, and I'm just kind of hypothesizing here, right? That you could have a group that would love to do what we're doing, but do not have the nerve to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the other part. There are the other people who are in like total negation mode, and they say, "What are they talking about? They're just freestyling this. They were probably born with a silver spoon in their mouth. I bet you that's what they'd say.
Oh yeah.
You're coming from the privileged group, and so it's easy for you to talk about these things." Because if you didn't have that privilege, you'd probably be singing a different song, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So taking these two groups into consideration, the ones that wish they could, but they don't, and then the others who are negating it because it's much easier for them than to really look in the mirror, my personal take. So we get down to this point of how to what degree, how far do we want to provoke others? And and I have to go back to the question I posed earlier in our interview. So for whom am I doing this? I don't have an answer, but I debate this one, but I'd really be keen on your take on this one.
Well, okay, so two main questions here, right? So one is really, how far are we taking these things, with the different groups from our perspective? I can safely say that I never try to convince anyone to take my path. And I think that's what I try to allude to in our discussion, that this is a really private thing. So whenever people approach me, I can tell you real examples, how many people approach me from corporate to talk to me about how I do these things. And I always say to everyone, and those were two people or two types actually within that group, that middle group that you mentioned, who would like to do what we do, but they don't do it or don't dare. I saw two different groups. One is the one where they have kind of limitations because they need to provide for the family, right? And the others where they have more freedom, they just also like the convenience of a corporate paycheck. Let me put it this way, right? So they are undecided or not sure how much they could withstand the fact that I don't have a corporate paycheck every month, right? So there I always say to everyone, look, hey, if you are taking care of 2-3 kids, that's a different league. But then from there, what I usually say to people is that, hey, if you hate your corporate job, then at least find a way to secure free time, right? So to scale back on your work. Don't go down the path of 14 hours a day. That's not going to do well for anyone. And try to gradually scale back on the time, do the 8-9 hours. It will be more than enough because, as you mentioned, Mike, they will not even understand if the person will not be there. Like 2 days later, that's a numbers game, right, for them. So just scale it back down a little bit and find in your free time those things that make sense to you, and balance your life like that for the time being, and work out a path for when your kids are grown-ups, which you can take from there and you have more freedom, right? Or the others who are still in the convenience section, I call it that. I usually just say, look, you need to make up your mind. If it's still convenient, then it's still not bad enough. Then you need to find the joy in your work, because you're still not at the point where you should give up. You need to find the joy in what you're doing, because if the convenience is good, you enjoy that still, then there are aspects of your work. And then that's when I don't scold them down, and that's a wrong kind of word, but I'm very tough with those people, and I just say, hey, don't complain. Then you are the category who still has it too good enough, and find the joy in your work, and don't let the petty stuff bother you. Then those petty things during the day, someone forgot to send you whatever kind of invite, just tell them face to face, hey, I did not find it amusing that you did not include me in the invite. Could you please do it next time? Or if not, then we need to discuss why you think I shouldn't be there, or just head on, right? Do it. You have nothing to lose. And then the other question you had regarding people thinking that we have it too good enough, and that would be a different case when we didn't have a silver spoon in our mouth. Boy, I can tell you that I don't come from a silver spoon background.
Of course, it's an illusion, but
Of course.
I'm just piggybacking on those things that you talked about, Zsofia. That nobody knows your story, so how can they make a judgment?
Exactly. And that goes back to compassion and acceptance. Is like, okay. And then usually I tell those people, actually, that's the third category, as you mentioned. And I usually tell those people, look, you know what? You can judge me as you want. It will not impact my life, because you're not the reference group for me to listen to. Your feedback will not impact how I'm going to live my life because you have no idea. Please look at your life and start making decisions for yourself and listen to yourself, and maybe really turn a little bit inward and look at how you live your life. And if you are happy, then I'm happy for you. If you're not happy, then start thinking about how you're gonna make it better for yourself instead of looking at others. So that's also a tough feedback, but I'm like, look, as you said, if you never walked a mile in my shoes, then you have no right to judge me. And I don't judge others either. So I'm usually just saying, look, just focus on yourself. That's it.
It's always easier to lambast others instead of looking into the mirror.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So I mean, but we know that, and the I think there's another part of this equation that is very important, and that's all part of that acceptance. And I see this as being a major component of the liberation, is that if somebody reacts a certain way, that actually it has nothing to do with you. They have a problem. They have whatever that problem may be, and it's not. I don't see it as being my job to perform some sort of diagnosis, because I would be doing the same thing that I would be accusing the others, because I don't know what situation they're in, right?
Yeah.
So for me, that liberation, because that is our subject here, liberation.
Exactly.
Liberation is not building this false correlation between the actions of others and what that has to do with me. I mean, basically, it could have happened to you, it could have happened to me, it could have happened to the neighbor. We just happened to be in that situation at that particular time.
Yeah.
But that's no reflection on us. And that's really a conditioning problem that we have as human beings. We keep thinking that's something that we did. And in fact, it has nothing to do with anything we did. I mean, I shouldn't say that it's not an absolute, but for the most part, I think for the most part, it never really has anything to do with us. We just happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time.
100%, Mike. And the only other thing I wanted to circle back to from our discussion is how far are we taking these things? Am I inconsiderate to others, or am I really that vagabond person who doesn't care about others? No, actually, no, it's the other way around. I care a lot. And I also have to state that this is really about live and let live kind of thing, right? Or as Maria Sepesh has said, lead your life in a way that you are not going to grind down the skin of the others while you walk among them. And it's a bad translation of a very nice Hungarian saying that she wrote. But that goes back to live and let live, right? As a principle. I would never, prioritize my own stuff above others to a point where I hurt them. It's not the point of leading an authentic life. So yes, I'm considerate of others, and I'm actually compromising a lot to make sure that others get what they need as well, right? So that's an aspect where we really need to be clear, right? That we are not vagabonds who don't give a crap about others, but it's more about finding that balance between doing something that has nothing to do with us versus doing something which lets others flourish, but lets us ourselves flourish as well.
And I would piggyback on that of what you said, in stating that this is a false choice that we make to assume that we don't need anybody else. And then there's no dependency that we have between each other, and that the effects of one have an effect on the other. And I'm just piggybacking on what you were talking about. That's all I'm doing. But the idea is to be very cognizant of those choices that we have and the effect that it has on others, and understanding that that it has to be part of this problem statement that we're trying to address. There was a point that you raised in our conversation about kids and the like.
Yeah.
And I think that plays very much in line with it, that we make a choice, and it's not always comfortable, but we understand that was that when we have a responsibility. I make a differentiation between responsibility and obligation, although
Yeah.
it sounds like they're coming from the same direction. They are quite different.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I think the responsibility part is very much tied to the freedom that we have and being liberated, and within those choices that we live with the consequences of that, of what we decided. And really, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And that means sometimes we don't always make the right decisions, and we learn from it, and we end up in that cul-de-sac we talked about. But we have to understand that we hold a certain amount of responsibility for that, of what we're deciding, and we should. I relish in the responsibility that I've taken for everything I've decided, because I knew that I was doing it for myself, even if I wasn't necessarily cognizant of all this the whole time. I think it's only later on that I started, much later on, that I started to understand what were my motivations in doing things. I never really understood them. I just kind of did them, and I didn't know why. And then later on, I understood that when I wasn't making that decision anymore, that I fell within that daily grind, and then you live with the consequences of decisions that you make that you wish you could have taken and moved them back, but you can't. But okay, but actually at the end, it's not that. It's there. You'll get something out of every decision. I've come to the conclusion.
Exactly. And then that goes back to our point that is this really, that black and white or right or wrong, right? It's just not. We can really learn from everything, and actually not making a decision or not taking responsibility is something that we cannot live with, right, on the long term. And the rest we can live with. If we made a decision
is a decision, Zsofia. No decision
I know.
is a decision.
I know.
We made a decision to do whatever, just because we claim that we don't have a choice. We always have a choice. We might not like our choice, but we always have one. And by not making a choice, which I mean, we're taking this back to the middle level in our society, because that's really one of our biggest problems, is not taking responsibility. And I see a clue. I wasn't quite sure how this conversation was going to go, and I left it open on purpose, but I came up with a long list of different ways to look at this, and one of them was from a societal level in liberation. We could have spent a whole hour talking about that one.
Just that one, yeah.
But in comparison to most of the living creatures on this planet, we should know better, and we do not. And we can control these things. I'm thinking about reproduction.
Yes.
We choose not to make a decision.
Correct. Yes. I could not agree more there. And I can also tell you a very personal aspect of this societal part or level of liberation. The way I grew up, I always saw, collective action as a means or ways to make a change and have an impact, a positive impact, right? And I just cannot accept as an individual that people would stab each other in the back instead of standing up for each other, for instance, in a corporate setting, right? So I've come across so many times in my professional career where people were complaining to me about certain things, on a daily basis, right? So to a point where I really felt, that they really have a problem, and I tried to stand up for the whole team, and I thought that they would back me up, and together we can make that change that's so important for everybody. And they just stabbed me in the back, and I hear it from others as well who are like me. And that's where I say, what? If you don't believe in that change, then it's not bad enough for you yet. You don't feel it that much, but then don't complain. Then I don't want to hear it every day. Or the second, if you really think that you don't have a choice there, and you don't believe in the power of, no company can replace 20, 50 people at the same time. No company. That's bullshit. And still people are made to believe that if we stand together, or even 50 people, they will just replace us in a day. I'm like, dude, no, they cannot. 50, even 20 people, even 10 people, they cannot replace. You know what? Medium-sized companies, even 5 is a long shot for them, right? That's damage for them as a company. And people still don't believe that they make a change, for themselves on things that are critical for themselves, and they would rather suffer. And that's where I'm going back to your point in terms of, societal or smaller groups in society level. I can't believe still, and then I'm trying to make a change every day here and educate people about the fact that they have a choice. You know how many times I got a backlash, especially in my home country, where they are like, what? Again, back to your point, they just made a judgment that it's so good for me because now I live in Switzerland, so I have no idea anymore about how it is for them. I'm like, sweetheart, I lived in the same country till age 30, whatever, the majority of my life. You think I don't know? But I made the choice. And that's why it's better for me now. So maybe make the choice. And instead of criticizing me, think about the fact that you haven't done jack shit yet. And I still believe that in many of those countries where there's a huge amount of exploitation, there's also down to the local mindset that had been in the process for long decades, but people really need to wake up. And they really need to see that, oh God, if we really stand together, at least a few of us, we can make a change. And it's not an external thing,
It's almost like the entitlement of being exploited, right? Because
Oh, yeah.
because they
Thank you
feel
so
that
much.
you are entitled to be as exploited as we are, and how dare you make a conscious decision, not even understanding the difficulty it is to be a migrant.
Yeah.
And it has, and language is only one part of it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
this whole idea of assimilation, but we can keep talking about integration. Integration for me is another way of saying you need to fit into our mold.
Yeah.
And that means that everything that you experienced up to now has zero meaning because it's not something that we do here. So leave it back in your home country. And this is the one that we keep experiencing. And so then you're put into a box because you're put into 2 boxes. You're a female and you're a migrant. Oh, a third one, you're from Eastern Europe. Let's add that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we'll add that one to the box too. So you've been put into this very particular box. And that means that we expect, when we're talking about assimilation, we are saying, because we put you into this box, we expect you to act in this certain way because this is our expectation of you. And if you do not match this, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going off, but I'm mentally, that because if you do not match this expectation that we have of you, then you are not integrating.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow,
So,
I never thought of that, but that's true. That's really true.
yeah.
And then
So
you're compelled to it was bad enough with all the conditioning you went through, but now you get put into this box, and that means you have absolutely no personality at all. You fulfill a certain need in this society, and it's almost like we're all prostitutes, you know.
you're right, absolutely. But you know what? I went through that whole process mentally, and it was really kind of degrading. I felt like I'm, as you said, like a prostitute. Like, what am I doing? But at the same time, I really did take the time to sit down with myself and think this whole thing through. And I found a couple of positive aspects. One is that I kept the control of my life in my hands, meaning that I went out of an exploitative situation and into a situation where at least I can control my income to a point where I can lead a decent life instead of being exploited on a daily basis. And if we have time at another point in life, I can probably bring my own example in terms of where I went from, or where I come from, and where I went to. And at the same time, I chose to take the positive from both aspects and use the fact that I know both sides of life to manage, people around me. It's really tough, and I still have a lot of backlash, as an immigrant myself, but I also found a couple of people already who are like, holy crap, you really went from one side to the other, and I would never be able to do that. How did you do that? And maybe you can also help me understand why other people think like that. You know what I mean, right? And that's already some sort of, fulfillment, as you well, yeah.
I think within this journey that we keep referring to in various facets,
Yeah.
we talk about not just finding our needs, but finding the essence of ourselves. In
Yes.
other words, that we are unique creatures we are not unique in the respect that we belong to something much bigger, but we are very unique because nobody has the experience that we have. And I'm not putting any judgment on this. I'm just stating a fact.
Yeah.
And in part of that acceptance I was talking about is very much tied to this idea that we accept ourselves and that uniqueness that we have, and
Yeah.
we relish in the fact in the fact that we have been able to not only recognize that, but we embrace it. I really do try to embrace it. And there's one last comment that I'd like to make. When we started, when I started going in this direction, specifically tied to this talk, it was your input. It was your input that gave the name to this idea of resilience. You didn't mention the word, but you mentioned it numerous times, if that makes sense. And we call it resilience uncensored. That was your phrase that you gave.
Yeah.
Yeah, resilience.
Yeah, I
uncensored.
remember.
I think that within the esprit of this subject, or of this moniker, I think we lived up to the task today.